Thanks for all coming and showing up. I'm excited to walk you through some of the thoughts and musings of someone who's been involved in the entertainment industry my whole life in various ways, built stuff, created stuff, worked for 2 big movie studios. These days, for the last 15 years, I've had this very odd job within the motion picture industry, and they've decided to call me a futurist, which is very strange. So I often say, well, I work in a pretend industry. We make pretend for a living. That's the movie and TV industry and the interactive gaming industry. And I have a pretend job in a pretend industry because that's not a real job. But they thrust it upon me, and I got asked to do it. So as a part of that, I give presentations and speeches all around the world to different sized audiences, and just this week I gave 3 talks that are somewhat related to this. They're all a little different. The audiences are all very different sizes, different dynamics. I just took on a professorship at ASU, so I had to give this talk in front of a gigantic group of students, which I'm telling you that for a specific reason, because we're going to do a little experiment together, and I want you to imagine 1,000 students in a giant room doing this experiment. We're all going to try it in a little more intimate fashion, so that's how we're going to start today. Does that sound okay? All right, so that's a little introduction. So here's what we're going to do. I make a prediction, a futurist prediction, as it were, that we all have something that looks like this with us, right? You may call it a smartphone. I call it a pocket robot for very specific reasons. So if you don't mind and are willing to indulge me, we're going to try an experiment. So if you have one, take it out and show me. Hold it up nice and high so I can see everybody's, I think, got one, right? So the prediction is correct. We're still waiting. She's going to get it out of her purse. Stand by. Stand by. She's going to find it. We're going to take a pause here. And she found it. Okay. So now we're at 100% instead of 99%. So I want you to try something, and indulge me for a minute. I want you to take your device and swap it with the person sitting next to you. And let's see, there's 3 of you, so you and I will do this. Okay? That's step 1. Step 2, I want you to now take that device and put it in your pocket or your purse. Now you hear that reaction? Imagine that with 1,000 students. It was an uproar. Many of them refused to do it. I forced them to do it. And there's a method to this little madness, right? There's a point to that exercise. The trick, believe it or not, is to see how long you can hold out. Because one of the things that I have sort of discovered through my arc of discovery, and as a futurist, you basically are an explorer of new things. You're tasked to look at things in new ways and try and think through things that maybe make sense through a different lens. So one of the things that's interesting about that exercise is there's a point where technology starts to not just become technology, but it becomes biology. It is actually physically linked to you, right? And now you have mine and I have yours, and we're all feeling a little uncomfortable, right? And a little nervous, right? Because there's so much going on with these devices and what they do. I'm going to set yours right here, right? And you can feel free to grab it at any time if you want. But we're going to see how long you can hold out. What these devices do is they have altered who we are as humans. And as it relates to this kind of wonderful place where we start to talk about what democracy is, how democracy works in today's day and age, and what changes, we're in a state of dynamic change because of what technology has done to us. The way we absorb information, the way information comes at us, the way we're asked to synthesize it, and how often we're asked to synthesize it. So, with that in mind, here's some interesting statistics that may surprise and shock you a little bit. So, most people check their smartphones roughly every 6 minutes of every day, every waking moment of the day. There are roughly 8 billion people on planet Earth. There are more active cell phone plans than people. There are over 7 billion cell phone users, but only 4 billion own a toothbrush. So it just gives you a sense of where things change, right? This one I think is fascinating. If you lost your wallet today, it would take you over a day to report that your wallet got lost and you got to deal with your driver's license and your credit cards. If you lose your smartphone, AKA your pocket robot, it takes you a little over an hour to completely freak out and start trying to find the damn thing, right? because everything is connected, and it is not just technology. It is biology that relates to yourself and your being, right? The average times a day that people touch their device is over 2,600 times per day. Think of anything else you touch over 2,600 times per day. You actually touch your face a lot too, believe it or not. But it's a lot. So that being said, I'm going to show you a little multimedia that will sort of illustrate an interesting point.
If you're going to be texting and walking, I'm a seeing eye person. I can help you walk and text.
Excuse me, I see you're texting. I can clear a path for you.
If you'd like to walk and text, we're here for you. Excuse me, sir. If you're going to be texting and walking, you grab out. Good. So you're barely paying attention.
Excuse me, pardon me, texter walking. Texter coming through.
Okay, so that's a real experiment. They really did that in New York City a few years back to demonstrate what is actually going on with humanity, right? It's terrifying and a little bit dangerous. And look, we all do it. We're all victims of this, right? We know we do it because the pull of that technology is so strong and so ever-present that we have changed as people. And it absolutely relates to how we view this thing that in that video was so great. You talk about the fragility of democracy and the fragility of the human spirit and how we have to deal with things and how technology continues to invade that is really interesting to think about. So, we now have a full expectation of daily, moment-to-moment, instant-by-instant compute, right? We all expect it. We all understand it. We go into any environment. The first thing we do is, oh, do they have Wi-Fi, right? I actually took the thing down. It bothered me so much that it was here that I took it off the stage and I put it back here because it's right up here typically, right? That's where it is. I'm like, well, I'm going to take that away because that's going to drive people crazy, right? It tells you, oh, there's your Wi-Fi. It's a full expectation, right? So if you think about it through a existential, philosophical lens, the resources and the tech advancements and the funding sources that are in the hundreds and hundreds of billions and billions of dollars every minute, and the overall global society desire and pressure will now lead us and is leading us into the next phase of compute. We are compute beings, right? Trying to make a point here. I think you're probably all getting it, right? So we're moving into the next phase, and this is what Jim asked me to talk about today, was what is the next phase? Well, this is the next phase. It is just computing. However, and there's a big however, this is one of the most advanced forms of computing that we as a human race have ever seen in our entire lifetimes on this planet. And it creates a lot of concerns, right? I would say no two letters have struck so much fear, trepidation, concern, anticipation, excitement, worry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Add your own adjectives than these two letters, AI, artificial intelligence, which we could argue pretty effectively is neither artificial or actually all that intelligent. But it's learning to get intelligent. We were just talking before the talk today. This concept of advancing compute has been around for our lifetimes, 50, 60 years. And in the last few years, it's moved from its gestation period to its toddler period to its impotent teenager period, of which it is right now, trying to figure out how it's going to be a grown-up, trying to figure out how it's going to be an adult. And that's why there is so much worry about this, because it's a teenager, right? Think about what teenagers are, and AI is a teenager. So I did a little experiment because I use AI as part of my daily existence because I have been tasked by others and self to figure this stuff out and try and make some context and create some understanding around this. So I did a simple test, and that's me. I said, Ted, why should I be scared of AI? And ChatGPT, which is one of the many AI tools I used, it said, well, you know, Ted, it's understandable to have concerns about AI, but there's no need to be scared. And that was a little disconcerting to me, so I said, all right, what if I'm still scared? And now it kind of started to be a therapist, right? It was like, if you're still feeling scared or uneasy about AI, it might be helpful to learn more about it and understand, and da-da-da-da-da, right? But it is synthesizing something that is trying to make me feel comfortable and confident and give me some ease about the technology. That in itself can be dangerous, right? So it's kind of worth looking at this and giving the read, right? The last line is interesting. Remember, it's okay to have concerns, but being informed can help alleviate worries, which is actually true, but also terrifying, right? Okay. So they asked me to sort of give you a little sense very quickly, and you're going to have to do your own research of this because else we'd be here all day trying to explain this. But Jim in particular said, would you mind like giving them a little primer on what the hell AI is? And I said, well, the best way to do that is to let's ask AI what AI is, right? So I asked an AI assistant that I use called Claude. It's one of the many AI tools that are out there that are easily accessible, both paid and free versions. And I said, can you explain what AI is if I was a 7th grader? And it did a pretty good job, right? It kind of explained things, like in a fairly interesting way. It's a really smart computer program that can learn and help solve problems. Okay, good. So that's the 7th grade answer. Everybody got a chance to read that? And I'll move on. Then I said, all right, now can you explain it if I had a PhD in computer science? And it did a pretty good job at that too. So if you want these slides afterwards, I can give them to you. But it did a pretty good job, and if I kept elaborating, I would get hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of pages of information about what AI is, from a purely scientific fashion, from a philosophical fashion, from a college education fashion. Any lens you want to plug this into, it will give you something that is relevant and relatively authentic and true. Relatively, I use that term in big bold. But at the bottom of my answer that I got from Claude, it said alignment with human values, which I would love to agree with. Part of my heart really wants to agree with that it aligns with human values. But human values are an awfully complex thing that have all kinds of nuances and challenges, as we all know from the stuff we're fighting an uphill battle on every day. So the fact that it'll just call that out and sort of try and explain it aligns with human values means it's probably not really aligning with human values. It's probably using its own value judgment and its own value system, and that's part of the danger and the trepidation. And it said, would you like me to elaborate on any more of this? I'd be happy to, right? So that's what AI does. So I presume everybody knows what aerial photography or cinematography is, right? We used to take big giant helicopters and put humans in them and fly them around. Then we took a technological step and we said, oh, you know what, we can do this with drones. So most aerial cinematography now for big movies, small movies, YouTube projects is done with drones, not with real helicopters, because real helicopters are expensive, and drones are less expensive. But the next step in this technological curve that we're all in is happening in front of us right now. So these are some examples of things that were not shot. This is from something from OpenAI, a development tool in the visual arts called Sora. So nothing about that was actually photographed. It was just synthesized with an understanding of, give me a train on a bridge with a kind of a Ireland-looking mountain behind it, and it learned from every other thing that's ever existed, because it scraped the internet and everything around it to make that image. And I can do this in a lot of ways. Make me a Mediterranean village. And keep in mind where we are in the arc and the curve of this, because this is still relatively early and is still looking pretty damn good. Give me a Japanese winter with cherry trees and people walking. None of this is real, including the people. It's all synthesized with artificial intelligence. And I'll say, well, now it's actually starting to get somewhat intelligent. Show me something like Big Sur, right? Or something like it. So as creatives and people that work in our industry that are always budget challenged, resource challenged, this gives us opportunities, right? It allows us to experiment and explore in new ways with new tools and new cost metrics and new power. But there's a give to get, right? It's not a one-sided argument. But it's interesting to keep track of that. So a little philosophical touch point here. What I believe, and I'll see if you guys believe this or don't believe it, is if you're thinking about using or incorporating AI into your world, you need to figure out how to harness it before it harnesses you. And guess what? It's doing a pretty good job already of harnessing you. It's getting really smart really fast. You need to figure out how to control it before it controls you. And guess what? It is 100% controlling you. Just like those little pocket robots that we did that experiment with a few minutes ago. There is a control factor going on, and it is figuring out how to do things to you with or without your explicit authorization. You need to figure out how to use it before it uses you. And this is the most interesting one of all. You need to figure out potentially how to regulate it before it regulates you. And this is the real challenge, because we as an ethical society with an ethical code that has some commonality could say we want to put some restrictions on AI. We don't necessarily want AI to delve deep into things like the FAA or the FTC or the SEC or the FDA. Or do we, right? Because maybe it can help in some ways. But what if it goes wrong? What if it goes awry? The bigger challenge in regulation is if you start to put controls on it, you maybe can control your community and your ethical code with people that are connected to you, but what about the nefarious and the dark side and the evil agents that will not follow those same regulation rules? Will you be putting yourself in a weakened state around the technology because those that want to do it for harm will not pay attention or adhere to those rules or regulations? Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that. I just have a question for that. So that's something we all have to think about, continue to think about. Is this interesting to you guys? Okay, just making sure. So this is just a little snapshot of where we are right now, and I could literally do this for hours. There are big, small, and gigantic companies, some multi-trillion-dollar companies, some multi-billion-dollar companies. That one's now $3.3 trillion. And I could do this a lot. Our friends at Apple are involved. Our friends at Microsoft are involved. Our friends at Google are involved. They're all trying to figure this out. Remember at the very first slide I was talking about the resources and funding that are going into figuring this out? It is so overwhelming that there is no way that nothing is not going to change. Everything is going to change because of this, right? It continues. AMD's involved. That's OpenAI. That's Meta's AI project, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, that being said, there's some really interesting, good examples of how AI is being used and functioning in our world, and in my world specifically, that I appreciate every day. So I have an electric car that happens to have a self-driving capability. It is run by a guy that I would say is now embodying Dr. Evil from the Austin Powers movies, if you watch those, because he's no longer a human, he's just a character right now, with his own very strong opinions. But on the upside, he's allowed me to do this. So I'm not driving the car myself here in any way, shape, or form. This is on a road trip. And the car, as you'll see I take my hands off the wheel, is driving itself. And it does a really, really good job of driving itself. I did it coming here from the west side of LA. So I asked my friend ChatGPT, does autonomous driving use AI? And the answer is, of course it does. A massive amount of AI. It can't do it without it. I wouldn't have this capability, and I wouldn't be able to do this. I was just up in San Francisco, and I did a road trip back down because I was giving some speeches up there. And pretty much the whole time, I'm a distracted driver, but it's okay because Elon and his magic are driving for me, basically. And this is witchcraft. It is incredible how it works. Because there's so much mathematics and so many things that go on to basically do this. And this is what my friend AI gave me a nice little encapsulation. So I talked about Sora, which was that kind of amazing visual, like, wow, that's cool. Well, we live in a competitive environment where all kinds of companies are figuring out the power of this stuff and the power of how we use advanced compute to create visuals. So right after that, a few months later, there's this company called Luma, that came out. with a product called Dream Machine. And it's pretty remarkable what they do. So this is just a few clips of what they're doing. Very early stage. And I would have to update this every week to show you how quickly things are changing. But it can create all kinds of imagery, so none of these things are real. It has a certain bizarreness to it. Things always start with a little bizarre, and for some reason AI likes cats, and it likes to experiment with cats. But it can create all kinds of different imagery from all kinds of different stylistic approaches and synthesize things. It can make things look like an old 70s kind of movie. It can do anime. It can do huge crowd scenes that would cost a fortune, right? It can basically create things that I want in my visual language as a project. And it starts to get really, really intriguing. Like if I was going to cast a shot like that, would be weeks and weeks, and we can do animation with it, and we can do all kinds of fantasy stuff with it, and it's pretty interesting to keep in mind how pervasive it is and how many styles it can attack and figure out. So there's lots more of that. So in 2024, the advent of doing this with AI, I'm going to show you a little experiment. So I took a headshot, because when you give speeches for a living, you have to give a headshot and a bio, right? So I have a couple different headshots, black and white ones and color ones, and I used a little AI program called Hedra, which you can find. You can download it on your phone if you want, when you get your phones back. And I gave it this little picture of me, and I said, okay, show me what it will do with AI. So I typed in what I wanted it to say, and it came out with something that was a little disturbing. So it made this creepy AI version of me.
I can't decide if I should be terrified about what's happening with humanity in the age of AI in the 2020s or enamored with it. Is it lulling me into a sense that all will be okay when clearly all will not be okay and there will be winners and losers? Is the only way to win not to play?
So that's a little weird, right? A little self-embarrassing that I'm showing that to all of you. But what's interesting about it is I was like, well, that didn't work all that well. I mean, it created this synthesized voice and it said what I wanted it to say. But I said, let me try another experiment. So I have a more modern headshot that's color. And I said, all right, let me see what it does with that. And guess what? You know, from toddler to teenager, right? It moved really, really fast. And it got better. And keep in mind, that this is all done with just a still picture of me from my iPhone. No sophisticated scan or rig or like all this money that we would do in Hollywood. It's just from a picture.
I can't decide if I should be terrified about what's happening with humanity in the age of AI in the 2020s or enamored with it. Is it lulling me into a sense that all will be okay when clearly all will not be okay and there will be winners and losers? Is the only way to win not to play?
Got a lot better, right? Not perfect, but for an iPhone app and a still picture, it's crazy. I will remind you again that we are in 2024. Think about what's going to happen in 3 or 4 years, 10 years, when we get this technology better, which is going to lead us into the next sort of part of our discussion today, which is deepfakes. You've all heard of them, probably seen them. They're in the news. We're paying attention to this stuff. So the question about this, good or evil, Jekyll or Hyde? Well, probably a bit of both. Just like anything we're talking about today, there is no polarized yes or no here, right? It's all in this interesting gray zone that is giant, right? And sort of unknown. So as an example of what deepfakes can do.
Paris, I don't want to be late to this premiere. We gotta go.
You should always run fashionably late. It's your night.
You're so absolute.
Thank you.
How do I look? Am I all prime ready to go?
Stepping up. Looking very sharp, Mr. Cruz.
I think we're really gonna wow the world.
Think people are really gonna believe that we're a couple?
I think most people will believe.
The story of my life.
All right, now we're gonna skydive into this thing. You ready?
Email sounds.
So that's really not Tom Cruise. And you can kind of still tell a little bit, but continues to get better and better all the time. So here's what's fascinating about this. This is where the Jekyll and Hyde effect gets really, really interesting. This was an actor who kind of looked a little like Tom Cruise and couldn't get gigs because he looked like Tom Cruise. So he worked with a coder somewhere in Eastern Europe, and they figured out how to make him actually look like Tom Cruise, and it became a little bit of a sensation on the internet. They started a company around it called Metaphysic, which is actually a real company now that is doing this stuff in all kinds of interesting ways, and I'm going to show you some examples of this. So that was interesting, right? Tom Hanks had to literally come out, use his own time, his own resources, his own money, and say, that thing you might be seeing on the internet and on YouTube and on TikTok about me promoting some great dental plan, that is not me. It looks like me. You might think it's me, but it is absolutely not me. At the same exact moment in time that is going down, Tom Hanks and his friend, Robin Wright, is working on a movie using AI in a completely authorized fashion that they have agreed to with a director you might have heard of named Robert Zemeckis, who directed another movie called Forrest Gump and Back to the Future. And they literally live on both sides of the equation. They're concerned that other people are using their likeness, and they're also using the same technology to achieve an objective. So if you want to go see that movie, it's coming out around Thanksgiving. It's called Here. And they're using it, as they said, like digital makeup. They are de-aging them and then re-aging them, different ages of their lives, using this technology. That all came from this sort of nefarious, kind of unauthorized zone, and then sort of moved into an authorized zone, which is kind of fascinating, right? Back to the driving thing. So every week I now am using fully autonomous driving.
Hello, from Waymo.
I don't know if anybody done this yet?
Get going. Just
A couple of you.
1 minute.
You like it? It's great, right? Did you feel a little nervous first time and now you're kind of comfortable with it? I was really nervous the first time, but it picks me up from the airport, takes me to the university every week. There's 2 of them there, right? Heading to the airport in my robotic vehicle. There's no driver. So far, so good. What could possibly go wrong? So far, statistically, it's way better than humans driving. So that's interesting, right? We're just keeping track of this stuff and watching all this kind of do its thing.
Coming in for a landing.
So this is advancing quickly, and I asked my friend Claude, does Waymo implement AI? Of course it does.
For any questions,
In a massive fashion.
Found one, right?
provider support.
And remember, all this compute isn't free, right? So even though my Waymo rides probably cost about the same as an Uber ride, I can tell you that this company, which is a spin out from Google and went independent, is probably not making any money on these rides yet. Because just the amount of compute it has to use to do this, to move me 15 miles, is enormous. And there's some big computer grid in the sky, and we're using an enormous amount of power to do this, right? So all these things, none of these are simple questions. They're all highly complicated. All right, so we're going to kind of come in for a landing, and I'm going to show you a few more things, and then we'll go on with our panel. All of this, everything we talked about for the last half hour, relates to data. We live in a data-rich society, a data-rich environment. Everything around this camera, this computer, all of these phones, the Wi-Fi, everything that's going on around our planet is creating data in an enormous fashion, right? So, an interesting statistic, over the last 2 years, 90% of the data in the world was created, going back to the beginnings of human civilization, right? In the next 2 years, it'll be exponentially more. It is insane how much ones and zeros we create and put out into the world every second of every day, every microsecond of every day is stunning and unimaginable. To think about, where do we store it all? Where do we keep it all? They all live in these data centers all around the world, and it is terrifying what's going on. So here's an example. Please don't try and read this now. I'm just showing this for a purpose. This is a short story that I wrote when I was in the hospital a while back, because sometimes I write ideas and concepts, and this is like for a little sort of dramatic kind of scary movie. So I'm working with a number of startups that are touching AI, and I'm spending my time kind of learning from the inside out. This one's called Nolan AI. So it took this idea, and guess what it can do? Within seconds, it can take my idea, which is like half a page on a piece of paper, and it can convert it into a script. So this is someone's job that works with a program that writes all the script stuff and formats it all right, and it can create the script with all the information from that short story and format it correctly, and it can even create suggested dialogue, which some of it was actually pretty good. Some of it I had to change. But it made the script almost instantaneously. It also created a schedule. These are real jobs that people do for a living, high-paid jobs in my industry. And the schedule is quite accurate, and it's flexible and malleable. It also creates what we call the coverage. So this is what the marketing department does when they start to begin to market an idea to see if anybody wants to pick this up to greenlight this as a movie. We call it coverage. So it makes a log line. It will also do something very sophisticated called a breakdown. And a breakdown is all the little pieces of every single thing that needs to go into every shot when you shoot it. And this is someone's job. This is a very sophisticated, very high-level job, and now our little AI friends can do this too. So it breaks it all down for us. It will also make the storyboards. This is obviously an artist's job, and it can do this in any style. I asked them to make kind of classic cartoon-looking storyboards, but it could do anime, it could do photorealistic, it could do stylistic, it doesn't matter. And the storyboards are pretty damn good, and they actually execute the story that was in my head pretty accurately. Who's scared yet? Okay, so now, as we wrap up, let's watch this.
Volvo for life.
You know the story here, right? None of that's real. No cinematography, no army of CG artists, nobody created that with a human hand. It was, I want to make a Volvo commercial, blank, 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 that does this, and AI does the rest. So the car isn't modeled or created or filmed in any way, shape, or form. All that greenery, which would take an army of CGI artists to do just a couple years ago, is all done autonomously with computers. So yeah, it can drive my car autonomously, but it can also do that autonomously, which is interesting. If you're interested in more of this, I don't have time to show you this in depth, but this is a company that started out as a couple of kids that were doing AI stuff. And they started a website called Curious Refuge that is a school to learn how to make AI movies and TV shows. And it's become very popular. They're friends of mine. If you go on and look at their gallery, there are hundreds of examples, and it's growing every day, of all different type of style and look and feel of what AI can do. So if you're interested in what we're talking about and you want to dive in more, go to curiousrefuge.com, I think it is, and you'll find them. And you can look at all this stuff if you want. As it relates to democracy.
Upcoming clip you're about to watch, it's in English, and it features Leonardo DiCaprio. His is the only real voice, but everything else, you guessed it, it's fake, AI generated.
I stand before you not as an expert, but as a concerned citizen.
One of the 400,000 people who marched in the streets of New York on Sunday.
And the billions of others around the world who want to solve our climate crisis.
As an actor, I pretend for a living. I play fictitious characters, often solving fictitious problems.
I believe that mankind has looked at climate change in that same way, as if it were a fiction.
As if pretending that climate change wasn't real would somehow make it go away.
We can now do anything we want with anybody. So there is an existential battle going on for reality, for what is real and what is not real, which we'll probably talk about in this panel. All right, as we wrap up, do you guys want a little levity after some serious stuff? You want a little laugh a little bit? Because AI can make us laugh. So if you want, I'm going to show you what AI could do with country music, because country music is a well-known thing. Anybody here like country music? Okay, good. I think you'll enjoy these. It's just nice to take a little break and have a little laugh. So should we watch it? All right.
Asking AI to make a hit country song about Dr. Pepper.
I drank 30 Dr. Peppers for lunch, and my butt's like a rocket that's awaiting to launch. And if I keep drinking through the afternoon, I'll be peeing Dr. Pepper straight soaking these boots. Pepper me up, keep the river flowing. I drink that soda everywhere that I'm going. It's a harmless addiction that I need in my bones, even if I always got kidney stones. These so-called doctors all say I should kick it, but they don't know nothing, man. They can all kiss it. There's a 7-mile step and a kid in my hand. Only doctor I trust is the Pepper Man. Those 23 flavors are all the guy needs. That sweet Dr. Pepper brings a man to his knees. I'm thirsty and hurting for an ice cold can of the Lord's good nectar. I'm a Dr. Pepper Man.
Crazy, right? So yeah, it makes us laugh. But there's some interesting things here, right? That's a job that didn't exist. This guy's on TikTok now kind of making a living, making these little comedy AI songs. And because country music is such a well-known thing, and what country music does as a storytelling vehicle is such a well-known thing, it can take and it can synthesize that, and it does a pretty good job. I don't know if we have time to see another one. No. Okay, so there's plenty of these you can watch online, and that's probably all we have time for today. So I'm going to wrap up and go on to the panel discussion, and there you go.
Hello. Thank you, Ted. While we get everybody set up here, and we'll have to get some, I think our John's going to come down and swap out that. So want to invite our panel up. We have John Bwarie from Stratiscope, who's going to help lead this conversation. We have Michelle Wu from Four Freedoms, who's the voice of every artist in the world today. I was like, where's my phone? And I'm like, oh yeah, I left it back there. Sorry. And Dave Lesher from CalMatters, who's, we're so thankful for, first of all, for you guys partnering with us on this. And is going to have a little bit of a conversation. You're coming over here to join us. While we get this set up, just real quick, Ted, you know the little analog experiment we did out there. Where did you, I can probably figure out where you would have fallen. Did you do the little analog?
I didn't. I was busy setting up the presentation.
One question was, you know,
fall on it?
How do you feel your knowledge of AI? And so I think you're pretty much far to the left or right, knowing a lot compared to most people.
Yeah, more from a sociological, humanistic versus a computer science standpoint, but yes.
And then the other question was like, are you on the side of like, it's a good thing or it's the end of the world?
It's both.
Okay.
It's just like anything, when you have something so powerful, in the right hands, it can do really interesting things. In the wrong hands, it can do really interesting things that are terrifying. Yeah. I think one of the most interesting things that maybe we can talk about is there's a lot of concern about what will happen with the human labor force, as many of the tasks that we ask humans to do, and you saw examples from my world, but we can go into the automotive world, the heavy industry world, the mining world, the healthcare world, and the customer service world in all forms, and look at all the things it's going to replace and is in the process of replacing. So that's one bucket, put it over here. On the other side, there's another bucket, which is interesting to go back in time. So if we go back well within all of our lifetimes, call it 50, 60 years, there was no such thing as the computer industry. Computers were in universities, in early government experiments, and there was a handful of humans in the world that were touching anything related to silicon chips, and what binary compute would do. Now, flash forward 50, 60 years, the computer industry is effectively the largest industry in the world. It employs more people, both first line of defense directly at computer-based companies like Apple, Google, Microsoft, et cetera, and then all the downstream effect from all those companies, and all the computer tech companies and everything. So you're deploying hundreds of millions and millions of people that had no job in the compute industry that now have some kind of job in the compute industry, including like an AV staff that does this. It's all computer stuff. Everything in our industry is some sort of form of compute now. So when you flash forward and say, well, is AI going to destroy everyone's jobs? Doubtful, but it will evolve your jobs, and it will become even more that everybody works with computers.
Okay. I'm going to turn it over to John to help lead this conversation.
Well, thank you, Jim, for getting us all here, and welcome everyone for this discussion. We're going to have some discussion here, and then if we have time, we'll take some questions from the audience at the end of this, but leading into our lab discussion afterward. Again, my name is John Bwarie. I'm the CEO at Stratiscope. Ironically, maybe for this conversation, our work is community engagement. We work in the space of people. How do people interact with each other? How do people join together to make change in their community? And so we have an interesting conversation today about computers replacing people. And I said, I'm being dramatic. Ted taught me to be dramatic about the statements we make. To get us going, we've got an esteemed panel here, but I want to start with Jim, who brought us all together. Jim, I know you like the analog. I know you like the digital. What is your level of comfort with AI? And tell us what you did for all of us to help us get more familiar.
I don't know what you mean by comfort, but I feel like I kind of understand it. Like, I mean, I don't understand it, but I kind of, I get to think I know about it, and I know a lot of the concerns about it. Like, we didn't even get to like the amount of energy that it's using, the ethical questions about that. Like, it's just, it's scary, but I feel we can't bury our heads in the sand either. Like, keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. And if we don't, it's like a wild horse. If you don't tame it, it'll just run us over. But I do, and I understand like this idea of like it's taking jobs. Like, it's frightening when we talk about the entertainment industry and the rights of artists and to their work, because it's pulling from what I understand, it pulls from everything that's been created. And you as an artist have no idea that your stuff is being pulled. So I was at a panel, or I went to an event last week, and there was a panel on AI and art, and there were three of the panelists were tech people, and they were talking about AI, and they were throwing around these like acronyms and terms, and I was just like, what? I had no idea what they were talking about. And so I thought, well, for our audience, I want to make sure that we have something. So I put together this list of 20 terms to know about artificial intelligence. And I use ChatGPT to do it because, like, I don't have time. Sophia, who's up there in the booth, wave Sophia, she takes care of me and everything in the Democracy Center. Did I take a job from her? I mean, I could have paid her overtime to do this. But I also don't want to, like, work her to death. Like, she deserves to have a life outside of the Democracy Center. So I just asked ChatGPT to put together a list of 20 terms in AI that people should know and create a vocabulary list that has easy to understand definitions. And in 30 seconds, I had it. I mean, I formatted it and I put, the right colors in and I did all that. But like, and did I feel guilty? Not really. But I do know, like this is not my work. Like, there's that kid in Florida, I think now, that got thrown out of school or got suspended because he used ChatGPT to create an outline. And like, this is not my work. But I wouldn't even know where to begin to either find the terms or figure out which terms were the ones that we needed to know. And again, I could have paid somebody, but we're a nonprofit that's like, I'm out there begging every day for money so that we can have programs like this.
Well, you would have likely just used a cruder precursor to that was you'd have Google searched a bunch of things and pulled a bunch of things and formatted it that way. This just gave you one more step of efficiency, and it's like an extra brain that you happen to have, right? Yeah. So we're getting more comfortable with the idea because we've used assistants. Humans have used assistants our whole lives, right? For generations and generations. We use technology of the era to make our lives more rewarding, more interesting, and less laborful, right? And this is kind of one of those steps. But the ethics of the data scraping and the IP and who owns what and the way that technology is so tied to profit is ethically disturbing and worrying for a lot of people.
And let's come back to ethics in just a moment. But thanks, Jim, for getting us here, and thanks for showing us an example of someone who feels a little guilty, but not really, in using AI.
I'm feeling more and more guilty as we go.
But let's, we're here at the Democracy Center talking about democracy. Dave, I'm going to turn to you. You've got some experience and interest in the AI space from your work at CalMatters. So could you describe and maybe give us a treat of what you've got going?
Yeah, I'm a journalist, and so we work with policy and state government. And I was the list is interesting. It left off LLMs, I think, which is a little bit ominous. Why did it leave that out? Large language model.
It was literally the one term that I did know from AI, and I was like, it's not on there. And that's why I had to do the bonus one.
So maybe it knows. Maybe it's trying to do something we don't know. So a couple of things. I also, Ted, thanks for getting our heads around exactly how big this is. I deal in the policy world, and so the idea of regulating this is it's a fascinating discussion. We could have a week-long conference on it. Governor Newsom just signed 17 bills on artificial intelligence just last month, and you can just see in the discussions about that legislation and in the bills that were signed, we're just tiptoeing into this. I mean, and the biggest bill that the whole nation was watching whether California would pass it, he vetoed it after it, had a pretty broad support in the legislature. But it really was about. It's how blunt the regulatory tool is when it comes to this. It was like, this bill was like, I'm very generalizing it, but it's telling all these large AI models, don't do anything bad, and Newsom's veto was kind of getting in the weeds and saying, how do you tell the difference between, an AI that can cure cancer and an AI that can build a bioweapon, How do you regulate that? Where do you draw those lines that are so fine? So, there's a lot of good, a lot of bad. I am pessimistic about regulation. I also, just two things before I get started here, and let me see if I can just get this keyed up, because I really want to give you a demo of what we're doing and how we are applying AI to the political process and the policy-making process, kind of as we speak. It's been up and running this year, and I think it's a game changer. But two things first. One is just a quick description of CalMatters. I hope you all know CalMatters, but we're 9 years old. It's a nonprofit news organization. We're up to almost 90 employees now. We are on radio all over the state almost every day. We're on television every day. We are in print newspapers all over. We're digital. We cover all the major issues in state government, education, environment, healthcare, justice, and we have the best voter guide in California. calmatters.org, especially on the ballot measures, I would highly recommend it. If you find a better ballot guide, tell me, because it doesn't exist, but I would like to know. The second thing is, this is I think a very positive use of AI in real time, what's happening right now. you know, this is going to evolve, and I don't want to be the pro voice of AI on this panel. I just read a story in the New York Times yesterday about Biden signing a memorandum about how the Pentagon can use AI. For the first time, there was a memorandum like that, and its description of how it applies to autonomous weapons was just chilling. I mean, it was just, it's scary, and that's happening now. and the U.S. policy was being shaped by what our adversaries might do. You know, so it's to say it's hard to regulate is really an understatement. It's hard to get your hands around it. But the other thing is, digital democracy really kind of is here because, you know, I was a reporter at the LA Times for many years, covering politics. I was on the presidential races, the Senate races, the governor's races. If you've read the LA Times for years, you read my stories. I was in the Sacramento Bureau, and the policymaking process in California has changed substantially since the press corps has really diminished. When I was in the Times Sacramento Bureau, we had, I think, 17 people just for the LA Times covering Sacramento, and now there aren't much more than that covering for all the media in the state. As a result, the policymaking process is much more opaque. It is really hard. There's a lot of legislators. There's nothing written about them. You know, there's a lot of the process that's invisible. I mean, I could talk a lot more about this, but you know, the application of AI here is really a way to kind of create transparency in this process that has become so opaque. And I really do think it's a game changer. I think, you know, with AI and with this data, I can see empirically into the decision-making process in the state government and all the relations that form around different topics and different bills in terms of money and past alignments and co-authors and things like that. And I have learned how the legislature works. As I've been there for about 30 years working around state government. And you know, these decisions are enormous. California has a $300 billion budget. It's the 5th largest economy in the world, you know, a state of 40 million people, and the decisions at the state level are pretty important. So anyway, a quick demo of what we're doing and a quick description of digital democracy. I don't know why this isn't displaying. That looks different than that. Digital democracy, we basically, we're building this, we've been building it for about a year and a half with Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and a web development firm called 10up, which I highly recommend. They've been great. And it basically scrapes an enormous amount of data out of state government. About 100 different data sources that are all located in different locations throughout state government, and it brings it all into one data source so it can all be queried and compared within one data source. And then we do two things with that database. One is we built a website that's really designed for a broad general audience that's not expert on state policy, to create kind of a portal for understanding who the legislators are and what's happening in the policymaking process. And because there's really nothing like it right now. If you want to find out about your legislator, good luck. I mean, I know where to look, and it's still hard to find. So the idea there is, you know, at least open a portal for more opportunity for civic engagement at the state level. The second goal is really kind of to change state government, frankly, because you know, more transparency will change the decision-making process. And the third is really to help journalism, because with that database, the other thing we do in addition to the public website, the artificial intelligence scans this database constantly. And it's trained, and we are literally training it every day to look for story ideas for reporters. And so when it sees a story idea, it prints like a one-page, what we call a tip sheet. And it has, what the idea is. It has a little background on the bill. It pulls quotes from the transcripts. And then it has data about all the relationships involved in that decision or that policy in terms of supporters and opponents and legislators and money and past votes and things like that. So, my goal is, what I've been telling the builders is that, I want the Modesto Bee reporter who doesn't have a lot of time and who doesn't know state government can look at this tip sheet and see a story that they can turn around in a couple hours. And if we can do that, and these legislators start getting more coverage in their local media, that's a game changer. So this search bar has access to an enormous database. So if I type in artificial intelligence, just as an example, I can see immediately all the bills that have to do with artificial intelligence. I can go to, every comment that has ever been made about artificial intelligence for the last couple years in the legislature in any public hearing. I can go straight to this has the transcript and the video, and I can.
And this is free for anybody?
This is all free. This is all up there right now. You can do it on your phone while we're talking.
At digitaldemocracy.calmatters.org? Is that the...
CalMatters.org. Yeah. Thank you. Is our website. It's the digitaldemocracy.calmatters. Yeah. .org. I keep putting the digitaldemocracy.calmatters.
It's okay.
Anyway, I'm going to confuse you. So it's got an enormous search. It's got all the money that's given to legislators. It's got all the votes. It's got all the legislation. It's got all the transcripts. And, I will show you a couple quick things. Here is for a legislator page. This is, we kind of designed this, like I say, for a broad audience so it doesn't look too wonky. We can overwhelm you with data, but this is Jim Wood, who represents North Coastal California. There's a couple of little database things here, but like I can type in here, California Teachers Association, and I will see Jim Wood and exactly how often he votes consistently with CTA and how much CTA has given him. It has all of the money he has gotten. I can look at labor. I can look at health.
And this is all AI generated?
This is all, it's scrapers, and then there's AI that all pulls it all together. Yeah.
And what about his bio with his unique volunteer experience? Did you see his bio? Who writes the bio? Is that someone of your team that's writing the bio? Or is it AI?
So, it's a funny story. We actually decided to start writing the bios ourselves.
Got it.
Now, because we wanted to pull in different things and AI was not picking it up. But I think AI is going to get better at that.
Okay.
His photo looked a little AI. Because I'm like 64. I'm like, it looks good for 64.
So this is all their campaign money. This is what we call influence money, which is gifts and travel, and it's money that they get after they are elected. This is all the committees. This is all their bills. This is all their interest group ratings. This is all the hearings, and this is a profile of their district.
And when did this go live?
What's that?
When did this launch?
This went up in April.
Okay. And what have they said to you? I'm jumping in, but what's Wood or other legislators said? This is great, or this is scary, or this is why are you doing this?
I think the legislators think it's both. I've had legislators say, there was a senator who said, I'm going to have to explain more why I vote the way I do, because it's so easy for anybody to just look at what I said, what I did. So,
yeah.
We did some of the things that we've been able to do with this data that nobody has ever seen before. I mean, the first story we did when this went up was we just looked at every vote cast by every legislator for the last 5 years. We could see every yes, every no, and every missing vote. And, we didn't know this, but, it turns out Democrats vote less than they vote no less than 1% of the time. 99% of the time they vote yes. Like, wow, okay. And even the legislators didn't know that. You know, I mean, I think they got a sense of it because they lived in the process, but nobody saw that data. So we've been able to see inside the process, like I say, in ways that, you know, I didn't even.
Would you have been able to do this if you did not have the tools of AI?
Oh, not at all.
Okay.
No. And you know what's.
So is that one in the plus column for AI for this? Is that a plus?
Oh,
Okay.
This is a game changer plus. Yeah. I mean, this is going to make the process more transparent and accessible, and you know, it's going to help journalism, it's going to help civic engagement, and it's going to help the integrity of the policy decisions.
That's great. That's great.
And we are. So there's a lot more to show, but I don't want to take up too much more time. But just that the AI story ideas we're about to share with every reporter in the state later this year. We just came out of a beta test in August with about 6 different news organizations that were writing stories off our AI tip sheets. And now we're doing a redesign of these tip sheets before the recession resumes in January, and by then we're going to have it to every reporter in California who wants to cover their legislature. And then we're just starting to build in other states. We're building in Texas. We're going to be up in Texas by March. That's our
usmatters.org, is that the?
Yeah. But it's, you know, I do think with all, like I say, with all we can see and how much difference this will make and the way the policy-making process is so opaque now, I think this is definitely going to change a lot.
Well, I think this is great. This is great insight. If I can have the panelists come back. Thank you, Dave, for sharing that and the work you and your team are doing to harness the power, as Ted mentioned earlier. You got to harness it before it harnesses you. Michelle, you're a technologist. You're an expert in AI, right? No. Yeah.
Let me turn on the microphone.
That shows your technical prowess. Right there
that.
It is.
Yeah.
But you're listening to this. You are in the creative space. You're an artist. You work with artists. You work with arts organizations. You're working using art and creativity to help address some of the world's most pressing issues. You're listening to what's happening, the good, the challenging, the fearful. How do you take us in, and how do you reflect back what you're experiencing in your community?
Thank you for that question. I probably work in the least data-driven field, which is art, and I'm an art historian by training. And I started this art project in 2015 with some friends, and it was inspired by what we were seeing throughout history. We were reading, we were talking about history, but we were also paying close attention to how people were not only talking about politics, but how they were engaging politically. And we said to ourselves, oh, democracy seems a little bit more fragile than we assumed. You know, we grow up thinking that it's firm. You know, it's the foundation of how we relate to one another, how we show up, how we shape public space, how we write history, and what we value in society. So it was a big tipping point, and we decided to do this year-long performance in 2016 ahead of the presidential election, where we started a super PAC. We didn't even know what a super PAC was. Speaking of Google, I Googled it, and then we worked with this election attorney out of DC who ended up doing this work for us pro bono. But he helped us set up this entity. We raised a bunch of money, and we started buying media space that's normally reserved for product advertisement or for, in an election season, ads about political parties and different issues. And instead of doing direct advocacy, we commissioned artists to put messaging in these spaces. And the hope was that art could help us think about how we show up publicly and civically in more complex ways. As a society, we tend to find comfort in things that are easily understood, easily packaged, right? But the truth is, life is really messy, It's nuanced. Even all of us in this room, you know, we identify in very complex ways. And so we saw a lack of critical thinking going on. We saw a lack of creativity. And we just asked ourselves, like, what is the role of a creative person in this moment? What is the role of an artist in this moment? And so we're not from politics. We were from different facets of the arts and kind of education space. But this performance accidentally turned into an arts organization, which is still doing its thing 8 years later. And I'm now finding myself as an executive in the nonprofit space, which is interesting. But we define civic engagement as community. And basically for the past 8 years, we've been making art, we've been going into communities, collaborating with artists from different spaces all over the country. You know, as a kind of Trojan horse, going into institutional spaces and saying, hey, like, you know, you call yourself a civic space, but, you know, how would you define how you're serving your community? What are you doing that is directly connected to what people say that they need, and what they're hoping for? So we've been collaborating, partnering, all in service of creating pathways towards participation. So I think our current political system, how it's communicated, the different ways we think about it, I think are quite limited. They don't always speak to many demographics in society. You know, there are folks who are disillusioned, apathetic, historically disenfranchised, who don't feel that their participation via their vote or some of these more conventional ways of participating matters. And so how can story, how can community connection, how can that feeling of belonging and being seen inspire you to think about how you can maybe show up in a more expansive way? So that's some of the work that we've been doing. And, you know, as it relates to AI, I mean, it's hard not to feel scared, especially as artists, you know, and we see it today where, you know, some of these AI tools are creating really, you know, really impressive looking, feeling things and experiences. And as people who went to school for many years and were trained, who studied the history of these intersections artistically, you know, we're thinking, whoa, this computer can do a lot with very little power. But again, thinking about how art can help us to ask better questions, think more expansively, and help to shape these tools in a way that are maybe more ethically sound, is something that you know, we talk about a lot. So, you know, I think of the artist Stephanie Dinkins. I don't know if any of you know her work. She works at the intersection of art and technology, and she did this project, I'm blanking on the name, you can go to her website and check it out, where she collaborated with this foundation that created a conscious robot. And, you know, generally when we create these tools, you know, they're meant to serve us in very transactional ways. They're meant to, you know, save us time, energy, labor, money. But the questions that she was asking is, how do you shape these tools in a way to think more expansively, to think more, to think in ways that are more value aligned, let's say. So she spent some time with this robot, and you know, rather than asking this robot basic questions, they got into it. You know, they talked about everything from grief to family dynamics, to racism, to what it means. Well, what does democracy mean? You know? And in doing so has helped to shape the way that this robot thinks. So again, along the lines of how can art kind of help us to think in these more complex ways, kind of inject more critical thinking and nuance, I think of this other artist, James Bridle, who wrote this book called The Ways of Being. And he's a technologist and a writer. And he draws inspiration from, well, first he critiques that when we think of intelligence, we think of human-centered intelligence. And part of that is, I don't know what your relationship to nature is or the natural world, but we have forgotten that we are actually a part of the natural world and that we are ostensibly the natural world. And, we've learned to objectify our environment and extract from it. And so he talks about how there are actually so many other intelligences out there, right? If you look at the intelligence of fungi, for example, and their sort of innate knowing around collectivity, how to work in collaboration, how to know when you've had enough, and then without even thinking, giving the rest of what you have to something else that's within the network who needs more. And so what would it look like to to build and model AI after non-human centered intelligences? He also does these experiments where he, AI is always trying to predict what we're going to do next. So he does these experiments with being random and like doing weird, crazy things that you would never expect in different kinds of like everyday situations. So I guess I will just leave you with that art's kind of crazy.
You're a bunch of fun guys up here, so that's good. It's a fun guy thing. So listen. We as you can tell, for those in the audience, we have experts in their field, experts in utilizing technologies and understanding the power of that technology in this.
You have me.
Well, no, Jim, you're right there with democracy.
I did this.
I have like 18 questions that I want to ask, and so we're going to sort of already go into lightning round. But I first want to get a thumbs up, thumbs down, or thumbs middle. Where are you on AI? Is it good, bad, or still unsure? Where are you? Just thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs middle.
Not sure.
That's a thumbs middle. Middle.
Some things have come up in this that have made me a little bit less
excited.
Yeah.
Michelle?
I think I'm a thumbs down, but I feel like it's here to stay. So how do we start to reimagine our relationship with it?
And Ted?
So I may be the contrarian, because even though I bring up lots of points that are what I think are salient points, I tend to be an optimist. I tend to look at the good that technology can bring to societies. The biggest question, you brought it up when you were talking, is when you try and create an ethical framework, everyone's ethics is an individual choice that is extraordinarily nuanced. And how do you link all that together when everyone has a different ethical code?
Well, I think, to me, that, and some of the stuff in your presentation, and not the stuff that you, and something you said just a few minutes ago about, having that interaction with the robot. Yes, like we all have different ethics, but AI is built by people, right? To begin with, like they're the
really.
Ones, but the people that are the ones that are driving it, I think probably have a particular profile, because a lot of the stuff that you showed, like on the examples, is very sexist. It's very objectifying of women. The last thing with Leonardo DiCaprio, all of the male voices were like these leading, minds of our time, and then the only woman that was represented was Kim Kardashian. So, like, what does that say?
Right. So that's an interesting. It's the nuance of all this is you're diving into, is in this media swirl that we live in, the way that all becomes what society is sort of another fascinating thing to study. But to your point around, is AI actually being made and controlled by humans? It started by humans, and then the technology grows and morphs on its own, and humans actually can't even answer the question now of how does it get to its answers.
But it's drawing from stuff that was created, right?
Yes, from every piece of humanity.
And I think that's where a lot of people are, and I'm beginning to see this concern of how it's leaving out women, how it's leaving out marginalized communities, communities of color, poor communities. So what do we do
But
about
if
that?
it's drawing from all...
Dave, please help us.
I honestly think that, balancing ethics and values is the definition of government, and we do it all the time. How much money do we give to education? How much money do we give to healthcare? The thing that's really different about this is it's coming out of the private sector, and these decisions about ethics and values are being made by a commercial entity. So
And what's driving them?
Not the government. I don't know what government would do with it, but that New York Times article I mentioned yesterday was talking about how the internet and a lot of these new technologies, nuclear, came from government, and this was one of the first that came from the private sector. And now the CIA and the U.S. intelligence is actually working with private companies to protect their work because it's a national security issue, which is just profoundly different. Anyway, I went a little bit different there, but I do think when it comes to the idea of balancing the vast differences in ethics and values, we do it all the time.
So we talked a lot about what it can do, the power of artificial intelligence, democracy-wise, with the sunlighting of all this data that we'd never be able to have one human be able to capture all this information, or even a group of humans probably, with what you've done since April with your platform. You've talked about all the things that it does, good or bad. It replaces faster, more effective, etc. What can't it do? What are things that are always going to require us?
So, I could tell you in journalism right now, one of the things, it can tell you the questions to ask people, but it can't go out and ask those questions. There's questions that reporters have to ask that people don't want to answer. And like I say, the information is opaque, so it's hidden. So you have to have somebody go and, knock on the door. You have to, and I think AI is a long way from doing that.
From getting answers that we don't have answers to yet.
Yeah. AI is just drawing from what's already there. It can't go find something that is in somebody's head yet.
It creates a sanitized version of truth that doesn't effectively and easily allow for hardcore investigation and challenge of those truths. It is part of what it does as a technology is it tries to synthesize some sort of commonality, and it leaves out the edges, to Jim's point. It tries to create a commercialized sort of vanilla sanitized use case across almost everything. And there's been a lot of challenges and a lot of work from these very large AI companies, these entities that are for-profit companies, to try and turn back time, turn back the clock, and reorient it to find more communities that are on the edge that are not well represented. And there's a lot of examples of why does it keep doing this? Because it can only scrape what it can scrape. So if it's material that is less easily findable, it will not, it works off percentages, right? So it will not deliver all of the nuance of an entire conversation. It will only deliver what is the bulk of what's in the media or what's on the scrapable environment.
Let me go, Jim, and then I have a question for Michelle.
So, and Michelle can probably answer this too. I think, and I don't know, because again, maybe I'm drifting now towards the not knowing enough about AI, but I think the voice of artists is what it can't do is create something original. It has to be prompted.
That Volvo commercial isn't original. I'm to push back just a minute.
But it didn't create it itself. Somebody had to prompt it to create it, right?
So there's a whole nother part of the presentation that I didn't show today that talks about artificial intelligence versus artificial inspiration. So we as humans become inspired by things we learn and the way we learn them. So in our generation, we would go to the library and we would be interested in a subject matter and we would delve into that subject matter. As an artist, you get inspired by other artists, by people that do things that are intriguing and valuable to you, and you expand upon them. No human lives and exists totally in a vacuum. You do not come up with ideas without other ideas that create the ideas that you come up with, and then you expand upon them and take different creative veins. Everything around the government and the entire world of legislation comes from other people's ideas that they're building upon and building upon and building upon. Nothing starts typically Very rarely does it start from pure zero, knowledge-based inspiration. So the point of all that is when you understand that we have taken what typically is a messy, uncontrollable, mostly analog version of inspiration, and over many, many generations with what computers can do, we have digitized inspiration. We have given people such easy access that people don't physically go to the library en masse anymore. They have a library in their pocket. They have a library as part of their biology. They get their inspiration without a lot of sort of physical work and physical workload to achieve it. So society's changed completely because of that. But the inspiration engine is always still there. Today, in the advent of AI becoming commercialized, you have inspiration as part of its use case, which it does. And it's amazing the things that it can do visually, as you've seen. But creates massive ethical concerns because it's now inspiring in a way that maybe no one intended that level of inspiration to be at such easy access. So you end up with a really difficult conundrum to deal with.
So Michelle, I had another yeah.
Oh, what it can't know? Oh, I feel like that's a hard question to answer, but this is sort of goes outside the bounds of art, but is really kind of anchored in, I guess, being human. So I'm kind of an informal student of Thich Nhat Hanh, and I think the one thing it can't know is how the breath can lead you to connection with all of this consciousness. Yeah, I don't know how else to
I get it.
say it. Yeah.
Let me just pose a couple questions that you're not going to answer, but I want our audience and those watching to think about as well. Thinking about the idea of how AI can be a tool to achieve the things. I think that, Dave, your example was a great one in democracy about one way that we can use AI as a tool to understand, I mean, I don't want to use the term, but big data, right? Like lots of data that can analyze it and present it in a way that's useful and actionable and inspirational. What other practices can we use that can help us inform more people? How can we use AI to connect with more people? Translation, we talked about sort of as a challenge perhaps, but also an opportunity to be able to make programming from government more accessible to individuals who may not natively speak English. Los Angeles, 220 languages, I think, spoken natively here in LA. We have some great, Spanish translators and some great Mandarin translators, but if you get to the nuanced languages, if AI can help, we may be able to engage more folks that way. But there's also the question of ethics, and where do we, not just the ethics of the machine, but the ethics of the humans using the machine, and how do we instill that, learn that, legislate or otherwise inspire that of us to address the technology that's here. So we went from encyclopedias to Wikipedia, actually to CD-ROMs with the encyclopedia on it, then to Wikipedia.
Encarta, wasn't it? Was it Encarta? I'm dating myself.
And now we're in the place where we went to Google and then now to AI, right? Where it's everything we need at our fingertips. There's a lot more questions than answers, but we're getting more answers. And so, Jim, tell us what's next, how we can continue to engage in this conversation.
So, perfect setup, because that's what our breakout session in the Democracy Lab is going to explore, is some of the values, your own values, and the things that you feel important to bring to AI, and begin to think about on an individual level, and then hopefully at a collective level at some point, what we feel that we need from government, what was government's role in this, what we want to see. Because I think, if looking back and seeing all the stuff that we didn't know about what was happening to us and happening to our brains with social media and how we were being manipulated, like, is this tool that we're using manipulating us in some way? And how do we learn from what has happened to us in the past and the future? So, John, thank you so much for leading this conversation. Ted, thank you. Michelle, thank you. Michelle, we are when I say we, the Janum and the Democracy Center are are working overtime to make sure that we can have Michelle and 4Freedoms, 4freedoms.org. Check them out, 4freedoms.org, as sort of the backbone of our program for our next fiscal year, which will lead us to, if you're not already familiar, please be familiar with the semi-quincentennial, which is the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which we will have a whole year of programming around, including a youth congress that will probably get into some of these issues, because it's really, Gen Z that's going to have to kind of tackle some of these issues. And Dave, thank you so much for that tool. I look at it though, and I'm like, oh my God, there's so much to know. But I probably didn't even know that there was that much to know. And I think in democracy, information is power.
You know what I didn't know, which I'm very curious to learn because it was up on the slide. I didn't know that we have a state crustacean. It was on the thing, and
okay.
I'm like, I got to find out more about that. It's on the thing.
All right, so our panel is going to go into the Democracy Lab.